rebalancing of power or a continued imbalance. So that's really the question then, which is it? If we look at each branch, the executive and the presidency in particular and Congress separately, is each or one too weak, too strong, neither, or both? Now, it's a complicated story on which reasonable people can legitimately hold differences of opinion, but my time is limited. I have less than 5 minutes remaining. So I would like to end with two assertions that I hope will be subject of some lively debate as we move to your questions. First proposition: both President Obama and the Democratic majority have a healthier conception of their institutional powers and responsibilities and a respect for those of the other branch than their predecessors had, and I might add, closer to the intentions of the framers. That indeed, one could argue there are signs of health in both institutions and appreciating both the possibilities, responsibilities, as well as the limits of their powers within the American constitutional system. I'd simply point out to you a number of examples, and there are many we can talk about. There was concern that the uptick in congressional oversight during the last Congress, when Democrats controlled the first branch, but George Bush was still in office, there was a lot of increase in oversight. The idea was with the Democratic president, they would pull their punches. Punches are not being pulled. Aggressive oversight of the executive on a range of national security and domestic policy continued. Second, debate on the future of the war in Afghanistan. On Iraq, it was disgraceful how little the Congress and the country engaged that issue before the decision was taken to move our military forces into Iraq, and precious little debate in the initial months and years afterward. It took a long time for Congress to do its job. I find the situation very different this time. This year has been filled with oversight, with demands by Congress for objective standards for determining the course of the war in Afghanistan. The president himself has said no additional troops will be committed or decisions taken until we have a full debate in the country and in the Congress. I'm not saying things are going well there. I'm saying we have, first of all, an assertion by Congress to act as it should, and an understanding by the president that Congress has an important role to play in this. You can see the same thing in a series of ongoing negotiations between the executive and legislative branch on amendments to the Patriot Act, on the disposition of Guantanamo detainees, on matters pertaining to transparency in government. You're right, some things haven't been released by the White House, and certain groups are going to the courts, and Congress is screaming about it, and I think that's terrific. I think it's terrific because the president understands that he also has a national security responsibility, and he has to balance those interests, and I think it's terrific that individual groups are contesting it in the courts, and that Congress is asking some very tough questions, including near unanimous resolutions directing the president to make available certain information. So I see a whole set of tensions on this dimension, set aside for the moment the big policy debates on health care and cap and trade and the like. I see a set of tensions important matters that are, to me, signs of vitality in the constitutional system. Okay, my second proposition is a little less uplifting. And that is that the continuing ideological polarization of the parties that we identified in our book, The Broken Branches, at the root of much of our government dysfunction, puts an enormous strain on our Madisonian system of separate institutions competing over shared powers. It's been very difficult in this environment for Obama to deliver on his promise of lowering the temperature, making us the United States of America, not the blue states and the red states, of having some genuine bipartisanship. There is no constituency for bipartisanship in the Congress, and while some members of the country, the public, think that would be a good thing, they themselves have sorted themselves into one party or other based on their ideological views that make it even more difficult for that to happen. Republicans, as a consequence, decided early on that they would be the party of opposition, not a party in a Madisonian sense in which you, while differences exist, you engage in a set of deliberations that ultimately lead to some form of negotiation, amendment, and compromise. That is not to be the course of politics and governance, at least in the first years of the Obama administration. So they have understandably decided to use parliamentary means to advance their policy ends. That means playing partisan hardball because there are no Republicans to talk to. That cuts against the grain of our whole Madisonian system and the role of Congress as a deliberative body, one that engages in civil, no screaming you lie discourse, and one that hopefully generates some public trust in the institution. So I end with that combination. In one respect, we're beginning to see a rebalance of the branches of government that is a sign of the durability of our founding document and the vibrancy of American politics. On the other hand, it's damned hard to govern under that Constitution in times of ideologically polarized political parties. But having had two very strong elections, Democrats, and with a campaign that was quite explicit about the policy direction they would take, I would submit the only way to cope in this circumstance is to temporarily act like a parliamentary body, relying on your party to try to produce some outcomes, delivering on the promises that you have made in the hopes that a sign of strength and unity in the short term might persuade the opposition party to follow a different strategy and ultimately allow the Congress to act in the deliberative fashion that Madison and his colleagues had in mind. Thank you. Norm.
Thank you, Tom.
You need to press the top of that.
Okay. Tom does not lie. I want to join with Tom in expressing our delight and gratitude to NYU and the Bradamus Center for inviting us back, and to John Bradamus, who was a model of the kind of legislator that we could use a lot more of in Congress right now and don't have enough of. And thank the Musical Act. It was actually a compromise. Normally when Tom and I make an appearance of this sort, we bring a marching band with us, but we decided to scale back for today. When we got here, partly because of the rain, we hit a snarl of traffic, and it actually reminded me of a time earlier this year when I was up in New York and hit a snarl of traffic because President Obama had brought his wife Michelle up here for a date. You remember they came up, went to dinner and a show, took Air Force One, and then went back that evening. 4 hours, got a big fuss, many in Congress calling for an investigation. It was cost of $24,000 for 4 hours. Eliot Spitzer said that sounded just about right to him. But, his first fundraiser, by the way, as he's stepping back into the political sphere tonight, $2,000 for the first hour. And of course, here we are on Constitution Day, and you can't think about the Constitution without the words Dick Cheney coming right to mind. Former Vice President Cheney has a new book out. The original title was rejected, The Angina Monologues, but it seems to be doing fairly well, and he's celebrated by getting a dog. He was a little, actually, I think a little jealous after Bo came along, so Vice President Cheney got a Portuguese waterboarding dog. And actually, he has, in one area, proven to be an ally of the White House. He, unlike any Republican in the House or Senate, has endorsed the health plan. As soon as he heard there were death panels, actually, Vice President Cheney and Tom have something in common. They are both going in for back surgery in the next week. This is true. Tom's back problem, they're not entirely in common. Tom's back problems came from playing tennis with me. Vice President Cheney's, when you lift those people up onto the waterboards, you do enough of them, it really causes back problems. Anyhow, almost everything that Tom said I agree with. As we discussed the broken branch 3 years ago, we were hopeful that we would see signs of a turnaround. A turnaround brought about not just by elections, but by, we hoped, a growing recognition on the part of Congress that it had been supine too long, and whoever was president, it was time to rethink and move back and assert those powers that come to the first branch of government. It's very hard to sit here today and celebrate the return of Congress, because in many ways, while it has improved, it is still very, very dysfunctional. And it was particularly disheartening for both of us to watch the President's speech to Congress last week, see the reaction and Joe Wilson's intemperate comment, but then see the reactions that followed. One thing that was striking as we watched some of the video replays as well, it wasn't just Speaker Pelosi who looked shocked and dismayed when Wilson spoke out. It was also Minority Leader Boehner, who I think was dismayed as much as anything by a fear that this was going to discredit his entire party. And we know that Minority Leader Boehner went to Joe Wilson afterward, along with the other members of the leadership, and asked him not just to apologize to the president. And if you note, Congressman Wilson didn't say, I decided to apologize to the president. He said, the leaders made me apologize to the president. But they also wanted him to apologize on the House floor. Because Boehner, who has had a long career in Congress and for a long time was a responsible lawmaker who worked on policy across party lines, understood that when the president is a guest in the House of the first branch of government, that to cross a line in this way is to dishonor not just a particular president, but the presidency. And to do it on the floor of the House is really to dishonor the House of Representatives itself. Many years ago, John McCormick, a longtime Speaker of the House, took to the floor when he was particularly angry at a colleague of his and went over his own personal line when he said, I hold the distinguished gentleman in minimum high regard. That was his equivalent of you lie. And while that was not typical, and of course we've gone through eras of canings and duels and wrestling matches and other things, Congress has recognized for a long time that it is important in an extended republic with very different outlooks, views, places where people are coming from, where politics is, in a way, war in a different arena, to try and contain the disagreements and conflict, to try to make sure that you reflect on the illegitimacy of somebody else's ideas, but not on the people or the institutions that they represent, that you view people as adversaries. And we've now, to reframe what the late, great Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, define discourse down to a point where it's not just that you can say something that's over the line, that's very clearly defined in the rules of the House as over the line, but then you can become a celebrity for doing so. And to watch John Boehner turn around on the floor under enormous pressure from his own colleagues to, in effect, defend the conduct was sad to both of us, because it's a suggestion that at least there's a very substantial part of Congress that still doesn't understand the sanctity of the first branch of government or the importance of maintaining relationships within bounds with all of the branches. That, along with the sharp partisan divide that is increasingly defining conflict as between camps rather than over issues. And that for so long, and in a system that is not a parliamentary system, had many of the conflicts that cut across party lines, and where you would often have people from both parties on both sides of significant issues, has made it very difficult as we struggle through to think about a true restoration, for example, of the regular order, where you have both parties engaged in a process with amendments, with real debate,